Little Goldia didn't know what had happened. One minute she was living happily with her parents without a care. The next minute she knew her house was broken in by criminals, with her parents murdered before her eyes. Knowing that the monsters who took her parents away would be after her next, she ran away into the nearby woods, hoping that they wouldn't follow her. Unfortunately, she was wrong, as the brigands had no intention of letting her live since she was a witness to their crimes. She ran as fast as her little legs could, but it seemed as if they were getting closer and closer the more she ran. Suddenly, after a few minutes had passed, the footsteps behind her stopped, which made Goldia pause in her tracks for a brief moment. She didn't know why they stopped chasing and was tempted to see what was going on until she heard screaming, which prompted her to keep running as to avoid getting killed by whatever attacked the brigands earlier. Goldia continued to run until her feet started hurting, but she didn't stop as she was too afraid to see what would happen if she did. Eventually, she found herself standing before a humble cottage that resided within the woods. Desperate for shelter and protection away from the brigands, along with feeling hungry, she knocked on the front door, begging for someone to help her. Surprisingly enough, the front door opened up rather quickly, which took Goldia aback until she realized that it wasn't locked. Though part of her knew better than to trespass into someone else's house, especially since the brigands did the same to her home, she was too afraid to stay outside given how dark it was getting. Reluctantly, she entered the house but made sure to close it behind her just in case. As she explored the house, she smelled something delicious and found 3 bowls of porridge sitting on a large table. Despite not wanting to steal someone else's food and potentially angering the people who plan on eating said bowls, she couldn't help herself and took a few bites. Of course, things didn't go according to plan since the first bowl was too hot and nearly burnt her tongue, while the second bowl was a bit too cold and mushy for her taste. But the third one, it was quite delicious as it was neither too hot nor too cold. Unfortunately, she ate the entire thing up, much to her dismay, and tried to rectify by scooping up some more from the nearby pot that had porridge in it. Despite her best effort, she wasn't able to prevent a large mess from being made on the floor and could only move away from the area awkwardly before arriving in the living room. She found 3 chairs that were all bigger than her and wanted to rest her feet a bit more. Of course, Goldia would find out the hard way that sitting on these chairs was no easy task, as the first chair was far too big and too hard for her to sit on. The second chair was too soft to the point where she could barely move in it, so that was no good either. The third one felt just right and allowed her to rest her feet for a bit until it broke. Panicking, Goldia tried to fix it as best as she could, but it was broken beyond repair. It also didn't help that she felt tired and wanted to sleep due to exhaustion taking over her. As she went to find a place to sleep in, while planning to apologize for the mess she caused earlier should the residents return, she found a large shared bedroom which had 3 beds all bigger than her. As shown before, the same pattern occurred, like with the porridge and chairs, much to Goldia's slight frustration, as she had trouble sleeping in the first and second beds because they were too hard and too soft, respectively. But the third one was just right, as it was soft enough for her to sleep in and sturdy enough for her to not sink inside the fabric. However, just sleeping in this nice comfy bed was enough to make her feel sad again, as it reminded her of her old bed before it was destroyed, along with the rest of her home and family. She could only sniff as she struggled and failed not to cry herself to sleep, with her tears staining the blanket and pillow. An hour later, a family made up of a father, mother, and son arrived at the cottage, only to notice that something was off, thanks to the son accidentally leaving the front door unlocked, which he was scolded for almost immediately. The family entered the house, only to see a mess made in the dining room and kitchen, with porridge spilled on the floor and evidence of their food having been eaten by someone. Even more shocking was the sight of a broken chair that belonged to the son, though it was getting pretty old, and would have broken anyways, even if said intruder didn't sit on it. Fearing that said intruder stole something from them and was still around, the family kept a lookout and checked every nook and cranny within their home to find out what happened. Eventually, the son discovered Goldia in his bed and was shocked by the sight that he called his parents over to show them. His shouting had woken the little girl up, but that wasn't what scared her. No, what really scared her was the fact that the people living in the cottage were talking bears of all things. Needless to say, Goldia started screaming and tried running away to the point of almost jumping out the window until the father grabbed her by the arm and pulled her back in. When they demanded to know why she broke into their house and made such a mess, Goldia began crying and apologizing to the bear family. Feeling guilty over scaring her, the family decided to calm her down, with the mother being the most gentle and patient with her. Eventually, after she stopped crying, Goldie finally revealed her tragic past and why she broke into their house, to which she profusely apologized for, while offering to clean up said mess. Though the father and mother did scold her for breaking without permission and making a mess, they were quick to forgive her, as they saw just how desperate she was to escape her attackers and find a place she could call home after losing her old one. Feeling sympathy for her and not having the heart to turn her away, the Bear family decided to take her in, with the son allowing her to sleep in his bed for now until they could find a new one for her. Before she went back to sleep, the Bears introduced themselves as Bernard, the father, Beatrice, the mother, and Bertolt, the son, who welcomed her into their humble abode, thus giving Goldie a new life and a future. For the next few days, the three bears bathed her, gave her some new clothes, and of course fed her before bringing her to Frosch village, which is where they mostly worked during the day. Bernard worked as a miller, while Beatrice worked as a seamstress, and Bertolt worked as a cooper. Upon being asked on whether they were always bears or not by Goldie, the family explained that they used to be human, but woke up one day in the form of bears for some reason. At first, the villagers freaked out and almost attacked them, until they found out who the bears were and calmed down. It also helped that their bear forms actually helped make certain tasks easier, though it did take a while for the villagers to get used to their new forms. Then again, considering that the village was visited by some of the Fey folk, such as a trio of small ogres who resembled talking pigs, they were mostly used to it at this point. Goldie found herself amazed by the fact that it had enchanted beings, especially those of the Fey. She had only heard stories of their wondrous acts, yet never got a chance to experience one in her life. She hoped that she would get to see them later, and would get her chance when the three ogres, Florian, Acorn, and Beckett, arrived at the bear family's home. As it turns out, they worked at odd jobs in the village, and were also great craftsmen who created a beautiful new bed, as well as a new chair for Goldie to sit on the moment Bernard informed them of her situation. Goldie was touched by how kind and hospitable the bear family was, despite the awkward first meeting. It also helped that Bertolt was protective of her and treated her as the little sister he never got to have. Despite how bleak her life had become a few days ago, Goldie found herself feeling hopeful for her future, as she had found a new family who would care for her despite not being related to them, even if it was far from the lap of luxury that she once lived in. She was still content over the fact that she was now in a safer environment, with the chance of it being taken away from her being less likely compared to before. Though she never found out what exactly became of the brigands chasing her, nor did she truly stop grieving for her old family, she was determined to continue living her life to the fullest, and with her new family. Of course, this wasn't the end of her story. Rather, it was merely a new chapter in her less than ordinary life.